time for the monthly obligatory wrap up and TBR video. So we are wrapping up the books that I read in April. It was a huge mixed bag of books. I feel like I rated each of these books almost between every single rating of like 1 to 5 stars. The only rating I didn't use was a 4-star, which is crazy. So I had 1 5-star, no. So I had 2 5-star books. I had 1 3-star book. I had 1 2-star book and 1 1-star book. There you go. I think that's how you do math. Anyway, here's a stack of the books that I read. I read 4 physical books and then 1 ebook, so I'll talk about that one first. And because I only read about 5 books this month, I figured I could put my TBR in the same video as my wrap up. So the first book that I read this month was actually the first book that I've ever read on my new Kindle, which I figure I probably should have to show you guys, but it's all the way across my room. I don't feel like getting up to get it, so we're just gonna have to deal with it. But yeah, I got a Kindle sometime in, I think, either late March or early April. And the first book that I read was A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. And I'd been hearing about that book all over TikTok, literally everywhere on TikTok. And I was like, okay, I don't really know what I want to read on my Kindle for like my first book, and I've heard so many mixed things about this book, might as well try it out. So I did, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I didn't hate it, but I didn't really love it. I thought it was really entertaining and definitely a good book to read on Kindle if you're just super bored. Basically, it's a Hades and Persephone retelling, and I thought the retelling bit was actually pretty well done. And I didn't really have a lot of issues with this book, honestly. It just didn't really go the extra mile into becoming a 4 or 5-star book. And I think my biggest issue with this book, if I was going to have an issue with it, was the writing style. I felt like it was a little simplistic, and it just kind of read as though it was one of those like children's books where it's like, Jane goes to the store, Jane picks up her groceries, Jane goes back home, and like that's kind of how it was written, very simplistically, not a lot of complex sentence structure. So while I enjoyed reading it, it wasn't really stimulating my brain in any sort of way. And when I'm reading, I really like to read books that are written more I don't want to say flowery, but I guess you could say flowery. I really like flowery language. I like when there's a bit of artistry within the language, and if it's not there, it loses a star for me. And then overall, I just felt like the story kind of meandered a little bit. There are definitely a lot more slow parts than there were interesting parts in my opinion, but thankfully because the writing was so simplistic, I could kind of just breeze right through them. So yeah, I feel like that's everything I have to say about that book. I mean, it's a 3-star book. It's hard to really have any strong opinions with a rating like that. At least I find it really hard. Like if something is a 3-star book for me, it's just so middle of the road. I don't really have any opinion on it. Okay, on to the next 2 books, which were actually read for the Read Fat Positive readathon. And I did have this like huge TBR that I wanted to get through, but I only ended up getting to 2 of the books. So the first one I got to was Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved it so much. I keep thinking about it even to this day. Basically, it's about this woman named April, and she's really into this Greek myth inspired, kind of almost Game of Thrones-esque sort of TV show. And this is like a huge TV franchise. And she's really into writing fan fiction and also cosplaying as the characters. So when April ends up cosplaying as one of the main characters from this show, she puts the pictures on Twitter and ends up getting a lot of hate for them because she is fat and the character that she's cosplaying is not fat. And then we have Marcus, and he's kind of the love interest and the other main character of this book because it is told in dual perspectives, which I love. So Marcus is one of the actors on the show that April loves, and he ends up seeing this tweet and all of the hate surrounding it, and he ends up asking April on a date through Twitter. So this book definitely deals a lot with fat phobia, and if that's a trigger for you, I would probably stay away from it. It's not super intense. It's not like every single chapter or every single page or whatever, but it is definitely very important to the plot. So if seeing fat phobic language and hate tweets and stuff like that is triggering for you, I would definitely stay away from it for now. But overall, I really loved this book. It was definitely the fandom sort of book that I was looking for. I thought it was so much fun. And the romance was really believable, because at first I was a little concerned because I was like, would this be realistic? Would an actor ever like see a tweet and ask out that fan just randomly? But I thought it was really well done, and they definitely had enough of a connection between each other that it definitely made sense for all of the stuff to happen. Oh, and also one of the plot points within this book is that Marcus, who is the actor of like the lead role of this show, he's also really into fandom and really into writing fan fiction for the show that he's on. So that's kind of a big plot point as well, and I loved that. I thought that was so different and so interesting, and I'm like, maybe that's not super realistic as like something that would happen in real life, but you know what, I think it's kind of cool. And also this book sets up so well for the sequel. I am so ready for it. I need it in my life right now, and I can't wait for it to come out because I will immediately buy it and immediately read it. So the next book is the other book that I read for this readathon, and that was Ruin Song by Julia Ember. I gave this book a 1 star. I don't give out 1 stars very lightly or very often. I try really hard to not rate books 1 star. Like, I will usually just DNF it, but I ended up buying this book and I felt like I might as well finish it. I feel like if I had gotten it from the library or if I had listened to the audiobook only, I probably would have just DNF'd it and forgotten about it. But honestly, I was just like, I cannot waste my money like this, so I need to just finish it and read it and rate it and live with that rating. So this is a Phantom of the Opera retelling, and it's a YA fantasy. It's also sapphic, and there is fat representation with the love interest of this book. Okay, so I did actually write a review for this one on Goodreads because I felt like I needed to explain myself why I gave this book a 1 star, because it is such a low rating, and I felt bad because it is a sapphic book. It does have fat representation, so I just wanted to clarify why I gave it such a low rating. So I do have a couple of trigger warnings for this book that I wrote in my review, and trigger warning for animal death, physical violence, and some homophobia that's kind of woven into the world building of this book. And for me, I'm kind of torn about the like fantasy homophobia, fantasy racism, stuff like that. And the older I get, the more I read, it's like, I don't really think it's super necessary. Like, I understand why people put it into their books, especially if it's coming from somebody who is queer or somebody who is a person of color, why they would want to put fantasy bigotry that is so real world bigotry into their fantasy books. But for me, I just don't want it to be such a huge part of the book. And I also don't want it to be super lazily done. I felt like this kind of wanted to do fantasy homophobia but couldn't really commit to fantasy homophobia. So it was just really weird. It didn't feel right. It was kind of similar to the way that racism was handled in Shadow and Bone, like the Netflix series. That I didn't really like either. This kind of suffered from the same thing, unfortunately. But really one of the biggest issues I had with this book was the fact that it wasn't plot driven, but it also wasn't character driven. The plot wasn't strong enough to carry the book, and the characters weren't fleshed out enough or interesting enough to carry the book either. For me, I'm a really big character-driven reader. I love characterization. I love reading about interesting, complex characters. And I was really disappointed when I started reading this book, and I was like, these characters are flat, they are one-dimensional, and just very, very boring. I just don't really care about any of their motives. I don't care about their backstories. I don't care about their personalities. So when that kind of happens in a book, I'll be like, okay, maybe the characters aren't super strong, but hopefully the plot will carry us through. I love a good plot. The plot was nowhere to be found. I couldn't find it. I can't tell you what the plot is of this book. I feel like it tried to have a plot maybe around like halfway through, but it was so flimsy. It wasn't gonna carry it, and it just completely ruined the book for me. I was also a little annoyed by the fact that so many people, like in the Goodreads reviews, or I think even on the back, yeah, on the back of the book, they were calling it a lush and dark fantasy, and I'm like, there is nothing lush nor dark about this fantasy, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of reviewers calling a fantasy book lush or dark when there's like no aspect of this book that is lush or dark. Like for me, a lush fantasy book has rich world building. It has interesting characters. It has sweeping, beautiful descriptions of setting and characters and the things that are going on. It has beautiful lyrical writing. That's lush. Lush is not one-dimensional characters, a boring plot, and frankly boring writing. So I feel like we kind of have to figure out what lush is, what dark is, and I feel like this book wanted to be dark really, really bad. It like really wanted to be violent and scary. It just wasn't giving it for me. Also, the main character Cadence, she never has to do anything. She's very inactive. She doesn't have to contribute to the plot at all. Basically everything that happens to her or to others is done by outside forces. She never actually has to do anything in this book. She kind of just gets to sit there. She's along for the ride and just gets to be kind of like boringly sad all the time. Like her sadness isn't even interesting. Like give me something to work with, please. I think one of the only things I really truly liked about this book was the sapphic representation. Like that was actually pretty good. And I really liked the friends to enemies to lovers situation that was going on here. I thought that was interesting, but unfortunately a trope cannot carry a book, especially when the characters are boring. I just wish I could drill that into people's heads. I feel like this is the book that's like, someone wants to write a book that's enemies to lovers, but they just want to write the trope. They don't want to write the characters. They don't want to write the plot. They don't really want to write the world building. They just really want to write the trope, and that's fine, but don't publish it. Ooh, girl, that was that was a lot of ranting there. We're gonna go into a more exciting book, one that I absolutely loved, a new favorite, and that is The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk. I loved this book with my entire being. This is a solid 5-star book, like so top tier 5 stars. It's incredible. Literally an incredible book. So if you're going to describe a fantasy book as lush, this is what it is. Beautiful writing, gorgeous characterization, a really interesting plot with solid world building and a magic system that actually makes sense. I loved it. Oh, I loved it so much. And this one also does like political topics so much better than say Ruin Song. This is a solid fantasy book. So basically in the world of The Midnight Bargain, there is magic. There's sorcerers and sorceresses. And unfortunately, magic is restricted from women. So while women do possess magic, they are restricted from using it. They are basically restricted from like the magical higher education within this world. And because things like possession in this world can be kind of tricky, especially with women, after they're married and once they start to try to have children, they are forced to wear a collar around their neck that restricts their magic use and also restricts the possibility of a possession. However, Beatrice, who's the main character, she loves her magic. She really wants to become a full-fledged sorceress, and she absolutely does not want to have the collar put around her neck. So during her bargaining season, which is basically sort of a coming out season into society and into being a marriageable prospect, she ends up meeting these two siblings who are very rich and very affluent, and she finds out that one of the siblings also wants to have her magic and will do basically anything to get it. Beatrice also starts to fall in love with one of the other siblings, and I love this romance so much. It's so beautiful. Ianthe is such a good character. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. That's just how I hear it in my head. But I love him so much. He is just so gorgeous and so like romantic, and he listens to Beatrice, and it's just, oh, it's so amazing. I love him. He's just one of my new like book boyfriends. I loved him. I just fell in love. It was so good. And I also fell in love with Beatrice as well. Like, her as a main character, she was just so interesting, and I could really feel her desire for magic. I could feel how much she loved her family, and I could feel how much she really wanted to change the society that she lives in. And I really love that this book kind of does the not like other girls trope, but does it so beautifully, because while Beatrice is like one of the few women that she knows who is trying to actively work against the system, she knows that there are other women who are doing this silently, who aren't sharing their desires but absolutely still have those desires, which I really love. And I don't want this book to be construed as like a negative not like other girls story the way that Stalking Jack the Ripper is because I feel like so many people will just read a book about a girl who's like doing something different and just be like, oh, it's not like other girls. And it's like, okay, fine, but that female character is still cognizant of the fact that while she might be doing something differently, it doesn't mean that there aren't other women out there who are like her, wanting to do stuff that's different. And that's not a negative, not like other girls. Like, I always want to say that any non-harmful trope can be done well and can be done poorly. And you kind of need to make the differentiation between the two. Like, not all tropes are bad. Like, the not like other girls trope is not inherently bad. It's just the way that you write it. So just keep an eye out for that. So yeah, I 100% recommend this book. I don't want to keep like ranting about these books, I'm so sorry, but I guess it's what a wrap up is for. All right, so the last book that I have on this wrap up is a book that I actually did a video on just very recently, and that is Rule of Wolves by Leigh Bardugo. I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. I didn't like it. I'm so sorry. I'm really happy for you if you loved it. That's really great. Unfortunately, it just didn't work for me. I don't really want to go too far into it because a lot of the issues that I had with this book are super spoilery, but I just really didn't like this book. I will say that one of the things I didn't like about this book was Nina's plot. I felt like it was really boring. I felt like she didn't have a lot of things to do. It was too drawn out. I feel like she almost could have been written out of the story if Leigh had just gone ahead and wrapped it up in King of Scars. I don't think that Nina needed to be in Rule of Wolves, so I was just not super charmed by her plot, and I didn't really love the way that it resolved. So that's all I'm gonna say about this book. I didn't like it, and I don't know if I'll be reading any new Grishaverse books. I'll definitely be waiting for season 2 though. Alright, so those are all of the books that I read in April. Now we're going to talk about the books I want to read in May. So I have quite a few books here, and basically a couple of them are from my last month's TBR that I just didn't get to. So first one, obviously, Daughters of Nuri. I still need to read this book. I'm going to read it. I swear I'm going to read this book. The next one is obviously Illusionary. This is going to be the next book that I read because it does come out May, I don't know, May something. Does it say? It just says May 2021, but I know it's really soon, so I have to read this book soon. Very excited about it. It's a sequel to a book that I absolutely loved, Incendiary. I have 4 copies of that book. That just shows you how obsessed I am with that book and how much you need to read it. And the last book that was from my April TBR is Music of the Night. I'm gonna read this book. I swear, I promise I will read it. Okay, so now these are the books that are kind of new-ish to my TBR at the moment. I'm currently reading this next book, and that is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I don't have the cover on it because I was reading it last night and I didn't feel like putting the cover back on. I'm only 17 pages into it because I did start it pretty late last night, which I probably shouldn't have done. But so far, so good. It's gorgeous. Like, I forgot how beautiful Erin Morgenstern's prose is. It's just absolutely flawless, and I really love that the inside of this book is formatted in almost the exact same way that the Night Circus is. Just, I love that for me. I love that so much. A total callback. And I'm so excited to read this book. And I love Erin Morgenstern's writing so much. So I feel like I'm going to love this book. I feel like it's already going to be a favorite. It's going to happen. I can feel it. The next book is one I've been wanting to read for a while, and I was trying to like read it in April, just didn't happen. And that is We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faizal, and I'm so excited about this book. I've been hearing more and more good things about it. I actually recently bought the sequel to this book at Target on a whim, and I'm like, okay, now I can officially start reading this book. So yeah, I'm super excited about it. I've heard great things. I did actually read about 50 pages of it, like maybe a year or so ago, but I just never finished it. I got into a really bad slump. So yeah, I'm very excited to finish it now and, you know, see if I also like it and see what the hype is all about. The next two are actually sequels to some of my favorite books like ever, and that is Dark Triumph by Robin Lefevers. This book is beat up. I got it from, I got this from Thrift Books a while ago, and as you can see, it's just like very beat up. But thankfully, I have it, and I'm gonna try not to complain so much because, you know, I'm really grateful that I have this book. So this is the sequel to Grave Mercy, which I read a couple of months ago and loved so much. And I'm just very excited to get through this book, and it's not super long. Like, I'm kind of surprised that the sequel is so short, but I'm ready to get back into this world. I'm ready to see some of my favorite characters again, and I think I'm really gonna like it. Like I said, the next book is another sequel, and that is The Missing of Claire de Lune by Christelle DeBeau. This is the second book in the Mirror Visitor trilogy, or no, it's not a trilogy, it's a quartet, I think. So I read A Winter's Promise about 2 months ago, I think back in March, and I loved it. I fell in love, one of my new favorite books of all time, and I cannot wait to see what happens to Ophelia in this next book. I've heard so many good things about this series. Like, I feel like everybody who has talked about it has loved it. So I'm very, very excited. And the last book on this TBR is one that I said that I would read in May, and that is Sweet and Bitter Magic by Adrienne Tooley, and this is a sapphic fantasy. This is another book that I've heard so many good things about, and I am dying to find another sapphic fantasy that I love, because so many of the ones that I've read since The Midnight Lie, I've just disliked. It's just been like 1 or 2 star ratings. It's been bad. So I'm really, really hoping that I end up loving the sapphic fantasy. I've seen so many people love it, and I have very, very high hopes. Like, this was one of my most anticipated reads of 2021. So I'm excited. All right, so this is my TBR. I'm just so excited to read them. Look at how gorgeous. So that was my April wrap up and my May TBR. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Let me know down below what books you read in April, what books you're planning to read in May. And if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also, go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye! Ooh, I thought it'd be me and you. Oh.